All right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our weekly Thursday Sangha gathering. My name is Jody, and I am the director of KTC SoCal. Happy to see all of you here this evening. I see some new names, so welcome. This evening's program is presented by Lama Kathy, continuing her series on the book by Mingyur Rinpoche, Joyful Wisdom. You can find out more about KTC SoCal by visiting our website, ktcsocal.org. Additionally, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel, KTC SoCal, to hear all of our past teachings. If you would like to make a donation this evening to Lama Kathy, you can do so on our website or through the newsletter that we mailed to everybody this afternoon. There are also different members, there's different levels of membership as well on our website if you'd like to become a member of KTC SoCal. Before I hand it over to Lama Kathy, please mute your microphone so there is no background noise. Thank you. And now I will hand it over to you, Lama Kathy. Thank you.
Hey, thanks very much. Really appreciate the introduction there, Jody, and I hope everybody's doing okay out there in Southern California, and things are fine here in Ohio, except that it's cold. We had a little dusting of snow today, so it's a typical February day. Here, we're at the KTC in Columbus, Ohio. We're getting ready for the Tibetan New Year, which arrives at the end of this month, depending on which calendar you use. It's either Friday, February the 28th or Saturday, March the 1st. Hey, we get to practice, equanimity and be able to celebrate New Year at least 3 times this year. One on the January 1st Western New Year. The Chinese Lunar New Year was last week, and then the Tibetan New Year is coming up. So it's a time that a lot of people like to dedicate the first 2 weeks of the new year to doing virtuous activities, meditating maybe a little longer than usual, like maybe 2 minutes longer than usual. I'm kind of joking, but whatever way you'd like to increase your practice, this would be a really good time to do it. It's called the waxing moon of miracles. And it gets called that because during the first 15 days of the Lunar New Year, the Tibetan Lunar New Year, it's associated, this time is associated with the Buddha Shakyamuni and an episode from his life where he actually was in a debate with non-Buddhist scholars. And in order to win the debate, he performed a miracle every day. So for the 15 days, he did one miracle after the other, and apparently he won the debate. So it's a time when our remembrance of this great event in the life of the Buddha brings virtue and goodness to us in our life. So it's often a time that people dedicate to practice. So it's something you can keep in mind. Now, before I get started on this book, Joyful Wisdom by Mingyur Rinpoche, you can see we're getting close to the end of the book. So it's been many months of study for this book, and we're getting to the exciting conclusion where he talks about everyday life applications of quiet sitting meditation, or shamatha. So what I'd like to do here at the beginning is do maybe 2-3 minutes of quiet sitting so that we can kind of relinquish the busyness of the day and bring ourselves back home to our mind. That's something that His Holiness 17th Karmapa likes to talk about. He says, "Oh yeah, you got this practice of recollecting and your breath, being with your breath, and so forth and so on, and sort of recollecting mindfulness." He says it's like coming home to your mind. So we're going to practice a little bit of that first. In order to do that, we start with a mental aspiration. The mental aspiration is we're going to do this short period of quiet sitting for the benefit not just of ourselves, but the benefit of all beings. And then after that mental dedication, we sit, whether we're sitting in a chair or sitting on the floor, we place our body in the posture of meditation, making sure the back is straight, the shoulders are straight is the wrong word, that are natural, and the chin's tucked in slightly, eyes can be cast downward, and one can then feel the harmony of the posture. And then feeling that, you can begin the practice by taking one deep breath, breathing out, and then allowing the breath to come and go naturally, placing your attention on the breath as it comes and goes. So we'll sit quietly now for just a few minutes, watching and being attentive to the breath. Okay, that's a short period of meditation. All right, thanks very much. Thanks for joining me, because I think at the end of a busy day, it's a really good thing to take a moment and sit and be still. So now tonight's presentation is going to be on the next chapter of Joyful Wisdom. We've covered the initial chapters, which teach us the methods of quiet sitting. And last time we talked a little bit about working with relationships and so forth in chapter 10. And now in chapter 11, we're going to talk a little bit about working with emotions. So it's chapter 11. The title of the chapter is Making It Personal. And Mingyur Rinpoche starts, as he does often, by recalling specific things that happened as he was teaching. He says it starts with a quotation. It says, "When you are face to face with a difficulty, you are up against a discovery." I think one of the number one reports I hear from people who do shamatha meditation on a regular basis is that they've become more aware of their thoughts, and they've become more aware of their emotions, and they they find sometimes that it becomes easier to deal with their emotions, but sometimes not so easy because they're more aware of them. And so as a result, we may not think of a difficulty as being an opportunity or an opportunity, or in this case, he's calling it a discovery. I think, very few people have the attitude that something bad happening is an opportunity or a discovery. But I wanted to share with you a quotation from Khenpo Tsultrim Gyamtso that I've shared with quite a few people recently. And let's see if I can bring this up on the screen so you can see it. Yeah, here it is. This is, let's see, can I do screen sharing? Oh, I can. Lovely. Okay. Khenpo Tsultrim Gyamtso, when he was in Columbus, Ohio, many, many years ago, he shared this quotation, a little thing that he wrote. And I think that it's something that we can recite daily in order to help change our attitude about difficulties. This opening quote: "When you are face to face with a difficulty, you are up against a discovery." So maybe we might not feel that way, but sometimes what happens is that we get very challenged by difficulty because it pushes on places in us that we are not comfortable with, and so as a result, we start feeling bad, basically. And then not only do we feel bad, we begin to label everything that's happening. This is a bad thing, and that is a bad thing, and that is a bad thing, and that is a bad person, and that is, and so on. And so we become then a little bit of a victim of a story that we tell ourselves about things. And so here he's trying to change, Khenpo Tsultrim, by writing this, is trying to change our attitude. He says, "May all of our bad circumstances arise as friends on the path. May all bad circumstances actually bring us benefit. May we realize emptiness, the complete freedom from all elaborations. And as a result of fulfilling these aspirations, may we bring great benefit to all sentient beings." Well, that's a tall order, and I'm not sure that any of us on our worst day could possibly do this. But if we do some of this practice when things are not bad and things are going fairly well for us, if we can practice this over and over again by reciting it regularly, what will happen is that we might be prompted to think differently when circumstances go against us. So in any case, I just wanted to share that with you just now, because the chapter is going to address this. So what he says in the second paragraph, actually he talks about, in the first paragraph, he says, I use examples when I teach, such as anger, fear, or anxiety. He says, but almost invariably, however, someone will ask, okay, I understand how to work with anger and fear, but how do I work with jealousy? Or someone may ask for an explanation about working with depression or loneliness or low self-esteem. And Mingyur Rinpoche says the same methods that he's described here can work with any emotional state. It's not he says it's not as though one method is specifically appropriate for anger, another for grief, another for anxiety. If that were the case, he said, we would need 84,000 different methods to work with each possible mental or emotional conflict. This goes back to the saying that the Buddha gave 84,000 teachings, meaning endless teachings to counteract the endless states of pain and suffering we find ourselves in. And then he says, and even that many methods might not be sufficient, since no two persons' experiences are exactly the same. And so he says sometimes the emotions are vividly present for a person, and he says, and seemingly inescapable. But for other people, their emotions alternate with feelings of contentment. Maybe they'll feel good for a while, and then they'll have bad feelings, and then so forth. They'll alternate between these states. And he says, and still others, so he's described two kinds of individuals, one with continuous strong emotions, another with strong emotions that alternate with feelings of ease, and still a third type of person, he says, who experience, they have no idea what they're feeling. They can't even identify their emotions. And he said, a student of mine recently confessed, he said, for a long time, it seemed as though I was just moving day to day through a kind of fog or cloud. The person said, I was functioning, going to work, paying the bills, and so forth. But I didn't really feel involved in anything I was doing. There were no highs, no lows. Inside, I was more or less blank, doing things because they were what I was supposed to do. And then he mentioned another type of fog that can arise suddenly when we are suddenly shocked by something that we were totally unprepared for. And he speaks about the example of a woman who discovered that her husband was having an affair by walking in a restaurant and seeing him with another woman when he was supposed to be away on a trip. She said she was completely overwhelmed by all kinds of feelings suddenly and didn't know what to do. So then Mingyur Rinpoche, after having described all of these various kinds of emotions, he said, he says, when after doing this for many years, listening to people express their emotions and talk about the different kinds of things, he says, I've come to realize it would be more useful to present the three practices of attention, insight, and empathy in terms of step-by-step processes that can be applied to any mental or emotional state. So in previous chapters, he's talked about the key and core work of shamatha meditation, which is placing our attention, having insight into our experience, and then feeling empathy both for ourselves and for others. He said those three skills of attention, insight, and empathy can be used to work with any kind of emotional state. And so he said he's devised a method of working with these three when it comes to emotions. He said there are several benefits to adopting this step-by-step approach. He says the first involves a practical method of relieving the immediate conditions of mental and emotional pain. So it's first aid. It's spiritual and emotional first aid. He said the second is to draw attention to the influence of deep-seated beliefs. Remember in the previous chapter, he was talking about Buddha nature blockers. Remember, he spent on in our last lesson, he spent a lot of time explaining that we have Buddha nature, which means that our mind has the capacity to know itself and to know itself completely and become liberated from pain and suffering and its causes. And so in the last lesson, he was talking about these types of clinging and fixation that block our ability to experience our Buddha nature. He called them Buddha nature blockers. And he said these are mental and emotional patterns that that hold these things in place. And then he says, so the first benefit of using the step-by-step approach is spiritual and emotional first aid. And then the second is to draw attention to perhaps previously unrecognized deep-seated beliefs that get in the way of our ability to work with our emotions. And then he said the third and most significant benefit involves recognizing the Buddha nature blockers as being creations of our mind. Then he says, as we begin to recognize the mind's power to influence our experience, we can begin to work with that power and discover within ourselves a freedom previously unimagined. He said, to put it simply, when we take time to look at the way we see things, the way we see things changes. So the idea is that by being able to observe the processes, then we're going to be, the knowledge that we gain from that will help us to cope. So he then says over the next few pages in chapter 11, he said, we'll examine the steps in detail. For the moment, he said they can be summarized as follows. The main exercise, that's the name of the first thing, the main exercise. Number 2 is try something different, then step back and take a break. So the main exercise, try something different, step back and take a break. So then he says, let's start by examining how to apply these steps in the context of shamatha. He said, the most basic of the 3 practices and the most important for anyone setting out on the path of meditation. So then he goes into discussing attention. Remember, we've talked about attention before, and what shamatha does is it returns our attention to ourselves. Sometimes we give our attention to other things, and then those other things take off with our attention, and we start to spin with these things. So he says, he starts by saying, self-awareness is a neutral mode that maintains self-reflectiveness even in the midst of turbulent emotions. Oh, I see. Got it. Then it says, Mingyur Rinpoche says, ordinarily, he says, our minds are like flags in the wind, fluttering this way and that, depending on which way the wind blows. He says, even if we don't want to feel angry, jealous, lonely, or depressed, he said, we're carried away by the feelings and by the thoughts and physical sensations that accompany them. Because this is something we talked about previously, which is that all emotions begin as thoughts or perceptions that then key into deep-seated reaction patterns. Of whenever you feel angry, this happens, or whenever we feel fearful, this happens, and so on. And so we might feel that emotions are somehow different than thoughts, but they all begin with a thought. So he says, if when we're in this sort of mode, he says we're not free. We can't see any other options or possibilities. Then he says the goal of attention or shamatha practice is to become aware of awareness. Awareness is the basis of what you might call the support for the mind. It's the atmosphere in which everything happens. Awareness itself is steady, he says, and unchanging, like the pole to which the flag of ordinary consciousness is attached. He says, when we recognize and become grounded in awareness of awareness and being aware of awareness, the wind of emotion may still blow, but instead of being carried away by the wind, we turn our attention inward, watching the shifts and changes in the mind with the intention of becoming familiar with that aspect of consciousness that recognizes, oh, this is what I'm feeling. This is what I'm thinking. In other words, we become aware of what's going on in our mind. Now, if you remember, he says, as we do so, a bit of space opens up within us. In other words, most of us spend time just jumping directly into whatever thought or emotion we're having and buying into the story of that emotion instead of seeing it as something that's happening in our mind. We jump immediately into the story that the thought is telling us, where we lose all perspective. Whereas when we're sitting in meditation and we're observing, carefully observing the breath as it comes and goes, we can actually see a thought arise. We can almost see it like an ocean wave. It arises, it crests, and then it disappears again back into the mind. And by being able to observe this, individual thoughts, then by taking this step back, we can see the individual thoughts disappear. And this gives us an inkling into what their true nature is. And so this is why the practice of meditation is so powerful, because it gives us the chance to see thoughts in perspective, as opposed to when they grab us and take hold of us, by seeing them almost as a third party would see them. So he says, with practice, the space that opens up when we can see a thought as a thought, he says the space that opens up, he says this space is the mind's natural clarity, begins to expand and to settle. He says we can begin to watch our thoughts and emotions without necessarily being affected by them quite as powerfully or vividly as we have in the past. He says we still feel our feelings, we still think our thoughts, but slowly our identity shifts from a person who defines him or herself as being the thought, being lonely, he says, or ashamed or frightened and so forth. He says it's not unusual, especially in the beginning, to worry, am I aware of awareness and at the same time aware of thoughts and emotions? And he says, actually, there's no need to worry. He said, once you've received the instructions, you know that the goal of practice is simply to develop this awareness. Once you recognize your goal, he says, awareness of awareness begins to grow and stabilize naturally. So then he says, it's not unlike going to the gym, where you have a goal, whether it's losing weight, building muscles, promoting your health, or some other reason. In order to achieve the goal, you lift weights, you jog on a treadmill, you take classes, and so forth. But gradually, he says, you see the fruits of these activities. And then seeing the fruits of the activities, you're inspired to continue. But in the case of attention practice or shamatha, the important point is to know that the goal is to establish and develop stability of awareness that will allow you to look at thoughts, emotions, and even physical pain without wavering. Bearing that in mind, he said, let's look at applying the steps. Now, because our time together tonight is not very long, I'm only going to be able to get through the first exercise, which is the main exercise of practicing attention. But we're going to be able to practice it a little bit tonight and then have a short discussion. So step one is the main exercise. And he said the main exercise of attention practice can be broken down into 3 stages. He said the first is that is simply to look at a thought or emotion with what in Buddhist terms is known as ordinary awareness. That is bringing attention to the thoughts and feelings without any express purpose or intention. Just notice and identify what you're thinking or feeling. You can actually identify it. You can label it. You can say, I am angry. I am sad. I am lonely. He says, we practice ordinary attention every moment of every day. We look at a cup for example, and simply acknowledge that's a cup. Very little judgment is involved at this stage. You don't say it's a good one, it's a bad one, it's attractive, small or large. We just recognize cup. Then he said, applying ordinary awareness to thoughts and emotions in the same way, it's the same simple acknowledgement. Oh, I see, I'm feeling angry, I'm feeling jealous, I'm feeling frustrated. Then he says, sometimes, as mentioned earlier, thoughts and emotions are not very clear. In such cases, we can look at the messages we receive from our physical bodies. If we can sit still or experience physical tension, he said, we can simply look at those sensations where they are in the body. He said the physical sensations could relate to any one of many different types of emotional states. He said the important point is simply to look at what's going on and acknowledge whatever you're experiencing just as it is, rather than trying to resist it or succumb to it. Then he says the second stage of this attention practice involves meditative awareness, approaching thoughts or emotions as the objects of focus on which we can stabilize our awareness. To use an example, he said a student of mine once confided that he suffered from what he called a people-pleasing complex. At work, he was always trying to do more. At home, he was always trying to do more. And then he would then get into a conflict when work and family conflicted. He said he couldn't please his family and his managers at the same time. And so he felt that he was a failure. And so he had succumbed to the first, second, and third of the Buddha nature blockers and locked them in with the fifth. He had defined himself as a failure, incapable of pleasing all the people all the time. This man had some meditative experience with looking at objects, sounds, and physical sensations. So I advised him to apply the same kind of meditative awareness during those moments when he would awaken in the night, for example, feeling anxiety. I said, watch the thoughts, feelings, and physical sensations. Initially, the people-pleasing complex might seem like one giant thing. But as you look at the complex, it doesn't seem like one big giant thing anymore. You'll start to see that it has lots of parts. I should have done A. I should have done B. Why didn't I do C? Why didn't I do X, Y, or Z? It also has emotions such as anger, fear, resentment. In other words, it's complicated. It involves like a knot in the stomach, perhaps, being disappointed, other people being disappointed to you, or even yelling at you. He said, as you look with meditative attention, a complex becomes like a bubble, inside of which are other smaller bubbles. He said, whatever you're feeling, whatever it is, the basic approach is to try to watch any of the smaller bubbles with the same sort of attention applied to looking at a physical object, such as a stone or a stick, which we talked about earlier, or focusing on a sound, as described in part 2 of the book. He says, in doing so, you'll probably notice the thoughts, feelings, and sensations shift and change. For a while, fear may be most persistent, or perhaps the beating of your heart or the images of other people's reactions. After a while, perhaps 5 minutes or so of one another of these responses, the bubble within the bubble pulls your attention. Focus on that with meditative attention. In doing so, gradually your attention will shift from identifying as being swallowed up in an emotional bubble to being the one watching the bubble. I call this taking one step back, where you're actually able to not identify immediately with the emotion, but then take one step back as though you were watching it from the outside. So again, it's well, then he talks about the third stage. And then once I finished his third stage, then we'll go back and look at all 3 of them in the context of practice. He said the third stage of the exercise involves a little bit of analysis and intuitive tuning in to determine the effect of the practice. He says, as I was taught this, there are three possible results to applying meditative awareness to an emotional issue. The first is that the problem could dissipate altogether. Some of my students tell me, well, you gave me this exercise, but it doesn't work. And I say, what do you mean? And they said, these thoughts, these emotions, they disappear when I look at them. They become fuzzy or unclear. They don't stay in place. And I say, that's great. That's the point of attention practice. He said, people look at me with surprise until I explain to them what's happened as they watch thoughts. When they watch them and see them disappear, is that they have arrived at a state of objectless shamatha, a point at which one is simply aware of being aware. This objectless state may not last very long. Some other thought, emotion, or whatever will pop up. I urge them to approach the state of objectlessness with the attitude, wow, I have another opportunity to develop my awareness of awareness. I encourage them to identify themselves as the looker, the person who's looking at it. The second possibility is that thoughts, feelings, or physical sensations will intensify. That's also a good sign, indication that deeply embedded perspectives are beginning to loosen up. To use an analogy, suppose you apply a few drops of water to a plate or bowl encrusted with dried food. Initially, it looks messier as the residue spreads. Actually, though, the plate isn't getting messier. It's just that the dried food is dissolving. In terms of meditation practice, when thoughts or feelings intensify, there may be a reluctance to allow them to intensify. There is nothing wrong with allowing yourself to express an emotion. Perhaps you might want to pound your meditation cushion or say something out loud like, how could I have done that? Or why did this person say that? One student of mine who had experienced anger at someone eventually realized that the anger she felt was actually motivated by hurt, that the person had acted in such a way, toward her. And then she began to cry. Expressing thoughts and emotions can be a great relief. The important point is to maintain your awareness as you express, not to become lost in the expression. I think this would be a little bit tough for people, but I can see what he's saying here and why he uses this as an example, because he wants the students to know what might happen as they do this practice, as they become aware of thoughts, feelings, and emotions. He said, then the third possibility is that the emotion may just remain at the same level, neither diminishing nor intensifying. He said, that's also great. All three outcomes are good. He said, why? Because we can use an emotion as strong supports for attention practice. So often we allow our emotions to swallow us up. And then he says, by applying attention, we can use our emotions as focus for developing awareness, an opportunity to look at the looker. Just as we need sound to look at sound, form to look at form, we need emotions to look at emotions. He says, in fact, intense emotions can be our best friends in terms of stabilizing our mind, giving the restless bird a branch on which to rest. He's using an example from earlier in the book where he says that your attention is like a bird released from a branch that then eventually returns to it. So because we're short on time, we won't be able to cover all three techniques tonight. Because the second one is try something different, and the third one is to step back, and then there's actually a fourth step, take a break. So we'll probably try to cover at least one of these each time. Even though we won't be able to apply all three practices at once tonight, we can at least talk a little bit about these three steps. The step of the first of the three steps, which is the main exercise, which is allowing ourselves to look at an emotion that arises. And he said the first part of it, remember the practicing attention, is that looking at a thought or emotion with ordinary awareness. he said, bringing attention to them and identifying them. And then he says, and when we do that, sometimes when we do that, he said they'll disappear. And that's a good thing. Sometimes they'll intensify, and that's a good thing. And then finally, it might neither intensify nor diminish. And he said that's a good thing. Why? Because in every case, we're more aware of what our thoughts, feelings, and emotions are. So I think one of the ways we can practice this is to just to just work with the basic practice of being aware of awareness. So I think the first thing to do then is to take a short meditation here and start by placing the mind in an attitude of dedication, dedicating the practice that we're about to do to the benefit of all sentient beings. And then placing the body in the posture of meditation, beginning with one deep breath, breathing out, and then for just a few moments, just follow the breath going in and out, just like we did at the beginning. Next, we can use either our visual attention, or we can use our attention to sound to become aware either of a visual object, which you could use a small object on the table in front of you, and then letting your eyes rest on that object, or you can close your eyes and become aware of a sound. I have a set of wind chimes just outside my window here, and we'll do that for just a moment. Becoming aware of either the visual object or the sound object, and then using that as your object of attention, bringing your attention back to it as your attention might wander. Now, having become aware of something that we see or hear, Mingyur Rinpoche's advice to me was, he said, you are aware of what you see. You are aware of what you hear. And you can also become aware of that awareness. So this is a method for us to try to become aware of awareness. Let's attempt that right now. You're aware of what you see, or you're aware of what you hear, and you can also become aware of awareness. moving on to the first exercise, which is to become aware of a thought or emotion, will involve allowing our attention to rest either on our visual or sound object, and then see what it's like when a thought arises. If a thought or sensation arises, you can turn your attention to it. But only as an observer. If the thought has an emotional content, you can identify it. I'm confused, or I am sad, or whatever. And then just observe. And see if you can become aware of awareness again. Then we'll take a moment just to let go of the work we've been doing and let the mind rest a moment. And to conclude the meditation with a dedication of goodness to all sentient beings. So that's a short meditation working with these principles of being an observer. So we have some time. We have a little bit of time. If people have questions, curiosities, or you want to say how that went, or whatever, you can use your raise hand function. I'll go to the gallery view. I think I can here. Yep. And then I'll watch for people who have questions.
Lama K, can I ask a question that doesn't have anything to do with the teaching tonight?
You bet.
So, you know, I have the prayer flags that have been up and they get tattered, and I can't leave them up because of HOA, so I take them down and we're supposed to light them. We're supposed to burn them. And then I have a Buddha head from years ago that, like, just a small one that fell during a storm, and I have all the pieces. And I'm like,
Uh-huh.
with
Oh,
fires and
yeah,
also the Buddha head that cannot be, there's too many pieces to put it back together. What do
I
we
hear.
do with our Dharma items? And we can't really, shouldn't be lighting prayer flags.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah, I know. It's really, yeah, it's not a good situation.
No.
Um,
What do we do?
yeah, I know. And I honestly don't know the answer to that. So what I may have to do is I may have to ask up the chain and may have to ask Lama Karma that question because I am curious myself about this. What you can do and what I've seen done in the past is that in terms of the items, that used to be a Buddha and now are just a bunch of pieces. I think there is nothing wrong with with putting them together, right? And placing them in the ground, in a place where people won't be walking, so they become part of the earth again. But I honestly don't know the answer to this question, so I'm going to need to ask and get back to you about it. Because I remember a long time, because see, you can't burn things there, you just can't. And so the methods because the method for burning any Dharma item is it's in the back of a couple of books, so I may or may not quote it correctly, but let me see if I can get it on screen for you, because it's really possible that I can find this quickly. I don't know.
And also, like, you know how we print out, sometimes we printed out our sadhanas, or we've been taking
Yeah,
in here.
right.
I mean, I have like a huge, well, a big box of this stuff. And I'm
Yeah,
like,
right.
I have it digitally now, or,
Mhm.
what do I do with that too? All the paperwork.
Oh, I know. Oh, I know. This is not easy. Let's take a look at this document that I have about the care of Dharma books. Let's
Okay.
just take a look. It says Dharma books contain the teachings of the Buddha. They have the power to protect against slower rebirth and point the way to liberation. Therefore, they should be treated with respect, kept off the floor, in places where people sit or walk, and not stepped over. They should be covered or protected for transportation and kept in a high, clean place. If it is necessary to dispose of Dharma materials, they should be burned with awareness and care rather than thrown in the trash. When burning Dharma texts, it's considered skillful to first recite a prayer or mantra, such as Om Ah Hung. Then you can visualize the letters of the text to be burned being absorbed into the syllable Ah, and the Ah being absorbed into you. After that, you can burn the text. So I think that's kind of a very simplified way of working with it. And that would work for prayer flags as well. And so what I'm wondering is if this could be done without burning them, but I'm not 100% sure. So let me ask, okay? And then I'll get back to you about that.
Thank you.
I'll try to ask tonight so I don't forget. And then I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can with that, because one of my other teachers in the past told me that items could be recycled. Dharma items could be recycled if they were paper items could be recycled if they were genuinely being recycled and not merely put into a landfill. So that's another thing that can be done with Dharma materials, is to put them in paper recycling so they can become more paper. But again, you have to be really mindful about that and not choose a recycler that doesn't really recycle but puts things into the ground. So we'll have to get some more info for you. So I wish I could give you a better answer,
That
Yeah,
was
but it's a good start.
right.
Thank you.
Yeah. So do other people have questions or comments about the exercise? Easy, difficult? Yes. Uh-huh. I like it. I like Dr. Bond. That's kind of cool.
Well, I'm using his laptop.
Understood.
So I thought it was really interesting, the three parts to the exercise, because
Yeah.
it always seemed unhealthy. When you recognize thoughts or start to recognize them as things that aren't really integral to yourself,
Mm-hmm.
it seemed like troubling thoughts, troubling emotions. It seemed unhealthy to just say, well, it's not me, and kind of like deny them, try and erase them,
Yeah.
because
Right.
they're in the consciousness. So they
Mm-hmm.
have a certain reality. So
Mm-hmm.
the third step, the acknowledgement,
Mm-hmm.
that seemed really valuable.
Yeah. Right. I really appreciate you saying this, because I think that what spoke to me in this exercise was the idea that thoughts may not be enemies, so to speak, but maybe opportunities.
Mm.
So it's so every different parts of the exercise, I think, speak to the different types of people. But I'm glad that this was useful.
Hmm. I thought so.
I'm really glad this was useful. Yeah, it's, oh my goodness. It's like the middle path, isn't it? All of Dharma can be described as a middle path away from the extremes of saying is or is not,
Mm.
useful, and so forth, unuseful. So I really appreciate that because it has to do with, and the other thing I liked about this exercise that he gave was that if you look, if you turn your attention to a thought that's arising, it does occasionally happen that the thought disappears.
Hmm.
And when it does that, it gives way back to awareness again. And it's almost like it really does seem to the Buddha's comparison of it being like an ocean wave that never ceases being water,
Mm.
no matter how it appears. It's still just water. So so thank you. I'm glad we talked about that.
Oh, oh,
Did you
good.
have any curiosities or things, or was just a comment?
That was just a comment.
That's okay. Comments are good. It means we're doing the practice, right?
Hmm.
Yeah, it means we're actually engaging, which is good. Yes, Jared.
I just want to thank you for this exercise. It was quite illuminating, and um, it, I definitely apply it to my process of meditating at night going forward, or just meditating in general. Um, but one thing I've noticed about my situation, where it's almost like through meditation, I've kind of discovered that my thoughts, unless they come back to the breath, my thoughts are almost like, and I've been trying to find a way to describe it, but like a pulsar star, where you look at it and it's constantly rotating it, where I kind of look back and see where it's just light and images, and it's just like, but it's almost like it's unceasing. And it's
Oh,
been,
yes. Yeah.
yeah, and it's been wonderful being involved with the Dharma because it's given me the tools to kind of work with what uh, I'm dealing with or seeing.
Mhm.
But yeah, I see it. I see the awareness as trying to be aware of awareness as like my mind just goes, oh gosh, how do we do that? Because it's like I'm constantly like, I'm just waiting for this thought just to cease. I know it will because I
Mhm.
have belief in it, but it's just like it's at this point, I see it more like I'm just finally getting back to where I'm looking at the thought and not getting involved with it, as opposed to like watching it come and go and come and go, where I know it does, but yeah, and just recently it was like, oh, how can I explain this? How can I put this
Mhm.
experience into words? And it became like, yeah, it's
Mhm.
just like the star that just keeps going on and on and on. And I'm just like, yeah, but I don't have to get involved with you. How do I, and so it's almost like, how do you step back
Mhm.
from that? And yeah, if that's a question, I
Yeah.
hope,
I, I
yeah.
I remember when Mingyur Rinpoche gave this teaching to me about, he just passed his hand in front of my face and he said, "Do you see my hand?" And I'm like, "Yeah." I asked him what awareness was. He said, "Do you see that?" And I'm like, "Yeah." He said, "Do you hear this?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And he said, "That's it." He said, "You are aware of what you see, you're aware of what you hear, but you can also become aware of awareness." And he said, "This awareness is with you always." He says it is continuous and never stops. He says it's there, it's present with you when you're awake, it's present with you when you are sleeping, it's present with you when you are in a stupor. He said it's there, it's always there. this awareness. And that really was incredibly helpful to me, because right now it's awareness taking the shape of this thought. And because I have a certain background, and so forth and so on, I have these different kinds of thoughts and emotions. But I think what happens is that grasping comes in, and then it wants it to be something. But what did Pema Chodron call it? She called it, it's just like the weather. He said, your mind is like the sky and everything else is just the weather, which is another amazing example of how to work with things that arise. But what I will say is that sometimes when emotional, I don't know that we can all take that step backward from an emotion and see it like that. And so I remember Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche said, when you're working with emotions, like not when you're on your cushion, but when in everyday life, but you could also do this on your cushion. He said, if you can look directly at the thought with your attention, you turn your attention to the thought and it disappears. Wonderful. He said, wonderful. He said that doesn't always happen. So he said, if you've got some leftovers, he said, then use your lojong, your mind training compassion practice with it. Say, oh, okay, I am feeling this. And may my feeling contain the feeling of all beings. And by my working through this moment of this emotion, may I and all beings be free. This sort of formula approach that the Lojong mind training tradition uses. But Mingyur Rinpoche is like really, really into, reestablishing an awareness of awareness. And so, of course, he would not necessarily use a Tonglen approach necessarily, but although he might actually try something different the next exercise. It might actually be what's happening, where you try to reframe the emotion or the feeling that you're having. But at the very least, being able to take one step back and not dive into and immediately identify with an emotion, it is pretty amazing. So I don't know if that was helpful. I
No,
don't.
it was. That's why I like asking these questions, because I love hearing what you have to say.
Yeah, no, it's I'll tell you what, I in some ways I'm completely out of my depth with his approach, because I'm used to the Tonglen approach. And so going with the awareness approach is very different, but there is a section in Great Path of Awakening where they actually encourage you to generate a mental affliction just to see what's going on in your mind. They say, like, hey, it's one of the first slogans in point 7. It's like probing and testing. I think it has to do with those terms, and you have to look into it and then see what it is. And if you can't, then you use your Tonglen on it. And so, I mean, the idea is to just be present with the thought without some kind of judgment, like it's a good thought or it's a bad thought. You're just more curious about it than anything else. Does that make? You don't have to freak out, right? Which is what I think Mingyur Rinpoche is telling us by saying, well, where is it in your body? Where is that, right? And is it connected to a sensation? Yeah, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm sorry I can't go much deeper with that, but I love where these exercises take me, because it's a whole different approach. And I just see that we've gone over time. Sorry. But if there's one more thought or comment that somebody would like to make. Okay. I'm really glad I joined you guys tonight. I'm really glad that you're there and that you're helping each other and you're practicing together and so on, because there's so much going on in the world right now that it's really good that you have the sangha to be together with and to help each other, because there's so many things going on. And my hope is that that this is a supportive environment for you, and that you can practice together. So that's a good thing. And I see we have Lisa, you have your little fur baby there. I see a
Oh,
little.
Wally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wally.
Hey, all right. Oh, what a face. What a face.
Yeah, he won't look though.
Yeah, are you a meditator, Wally? Are you
He likes it when if there's videos of chanting, he likes that. Like Omani Pen, like videos. He loves it.
Oh. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. That's great. Oh, well then, I guess that's on that note, we will we'll dedicate some merit. We'll pull together all the goodness of this evening's program and make the aspiration that all beings everywhere are free from suffering, come to Buddhahood, and then emanate in all directions to help us. And so I'll recite this short prayer. Through this merit, may all achieve the omniscience of Buddhahood. May it defeat our common enemy, wrongdoing, from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. From the ocean of samsara, may we free all beings. May we free all beings. May we free all beings. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. That was a good
Okay.
Next
Take,
month.
oh, yes. See you next month. Okay. Yeah. Take care, everyone. I'm thinking
Bye.
about
Thank you, everybody, for being
Good night.
here.
Right.
Okay. Omane Padme Hum.
Omani Padme Hum.